Everybody, we're back with topics in ancient world history, and this is the video where things are going to get real. We spent the first few videos going over just some facts, right? Contextual information for some of these ancient civilizations. We're just providing the background information. This is where we start to actually do the work of historians. The study of history is not just knowing what happened. That's really only the first step of it, or the first stage of it. We need to take the information we know about context and use it to interpret evidence from the past. And so today I want to look at a few primary sources. Primary sources, of course, are things that come from the past, evidence that was left over from past civilizations. And for the ancient world, this information is relatively scarce, right? So we really have to read closely. We have to look carefully at the information that's there. We have to take the information we know about the context and use it to interpret what's going on. The meaning is not always clear, and in fact, the stuff that we analyze can actually be a little misleading. And so, but that's the process you're going to go through this entire term. All of the assignments, the papers, the essay exams, things like that are about taking texts and interpreting them using the contextual information that you have at your disposal. I want to start this process with a text that I really love to teach. Actually, this is from a long time ago, right? Roughly 2200 BCE. This is from the city-state of Akkad in Mesopotamia, so Akkadian. And it's an advice letter. Now, I like to start with this one because students often look at this and say, oh, I know what's going on here. This sounds kind of like the advice my parents gave me when I, insert life moment, when I went off to college, or when I, got my driver's license, or when I was first becoming independent, or whatever it was, right? And in a way, it is what's going on. But what you have to realize is that even if it looks familiar, that familiarity is probably misleading, because the context of ancient Mesopotamia, as we've seen, is very different. So let's recall, we have these. This is an area given over to natural disaster frequently, floods of these rivers, and wiping out crops and fortunes and houses and things like that. It's also a place where there was a lot of trade, a lot of warfare, a lot of conflict and other kinds of relations between people in different city-states. It was an unstable environment to live in, right? And so then when we come to the text, I like to take time when I teach this class in a normal classroom environment to really look at this and elicit information from students. And I don't want to give absolutely everything away here. I'd like you to do some of the work as you read this text closely. It's only 6 paragraphs long, right? But if you look at the first paragraph, one of the first thing the father says to him is, don't loiter. Don't stand around in a public place, because chances are if you're in a public place, you're going to witness a dispute. And if you witness a dispute, if you see a fight between two people, you're going to get drawn into that. Not in the sense of like being forced to fight, but somebody injures another person, you would be a witness and you may get dragged into a judicial proceeding. Now, we're going to look in a couple minutes here at the Code of Hammurabi, which is a few hundred years after this. But the Code of Hammurabi was not invented out of whole cloth. Those legal principles that show up in the Code of Hammurabi were almost certainly in place for centuries before. And so we can assume that some of the things we see there are present. And one of the points that we can draw from the Code of Hammurabi is that legal status was largely dependent on one's social status or one's economic status, right? That the judicial process was favorable to those who had money and power. And so one of the questions you have to ask about this family, the father and his son, is where do they sit, right? Now, there's evidence here. This is a written text. The father seems to be writing this to his son. The son seems to be able to read it, which means, obviously, that this is a literate family. That means probably that they were not the poorest of the poor. But on the other hand, in ancient Mesopotamia, the merchants were largely the ones who were literate. They were the cuneiform, which we have seen. I think I can go to the PowerPoint here. Let me go back a couple of slides. Yeah, right there. This is a cuneiform tablet, okay? This is the writing system that existed in ancient Mesopotamia, and this is probably some kind of trade document, inventory, perhaps. You can see that there's a repeated thing here. That might be the good being traded, and then this column has information about the transaction. There's maybe some more information over here. Maybe this is like the price or the terms of sale or where things need to be delivered or something like that, right? If you look at this not too closely even, you can see that it resembles like an Excel spreadsheet. And that's probably what this is, actually. This is a record of trade and that's primarily what cuneiform was used for. And so we may assume from that information that this family was a family of merchants or maybe accountants or something like that, right? And the first paragraph gives us an indication that they almost certainly were not elites, but they were not probably the lowest of the low either. Why would it be a problem for him to get involved in a judicial proceeding? Well, chances are this court case is going to involve people more powerful, more wealthy than this family is. And so a dispute is a covered pit, says the father, right? If you get involved in this and you end up testifying against somebody, you're going to make a powerful enemy, which is probably why he follows it up by saying things like, do not return evil to your adversary. Requite with kindness the one who does evil to you. Maintain justice for your enemy. Be friendly to your enemy. This is not because that's a simple code of ethics where you need to be nice to people. That sort of thought didn't show up in the civilizations of any part of the world until maybe a century and a half after this. We're going to talk about the Axial Age later in the term, where that connection between behavior and ethics and things, and even like the will of the gods, becomes a common part of many of these world religions that emerge in that period. That's not the case here, right? This instead seems to be utilitarian. When he says be generous to people, give people food and drink and gifts and things like this is a way of making powerful friends, potentially. Now, if we have now a sense of where this family sits in the socioeconomic ladder, right, we may be able to make some sense of these other things. Okay, let me skip down to this paragraph. I want to go back to the third one in a second here, but the father says, look, this is the kind of job I think you should seek, right? He says, if it be the wish of a ruler that you belong to him. So it sounds like he's going to give himself into slavery, but I think that means enter the employment of somebody powerful. If you are entrusted with his closely guarded seal, open his treasure house and enter it, for no one but you may do it. What is this job? Well, probably some kind of accountant or treasurer, and that makes sense given, the common connection between people who were literate and people and the kind of jobs that people who were literate did. But then he says, of course, do not steal from your employer, because if you do, you're going to get found out, and then that's just going to go badly for you and probably for our family as well, right? Which brings us then to the third paragraph. Now, there's a lot to chew on here, okay? He's giving his son advice on sex, basically, okay? But he warns his son against getting too close to. He doesn't necessarily forbid him from having sex with these type of women, but he is cautioning him about getting too close to certain types of women. He says, first of all, be careful about getting too close to slave girls, right? He says the slave girl should not rule your bedroom like a wife. And he, in fact, gives him a kind of mantra. The household which a slave girl rules, she disrupts. You get a sense there may be some family history here. Maybe the father himself had a problem with this, right? So the question is, why would he warn him from against getting too involved, maybe romantically or something, with slave girls. And, you know, there are a lot of possible answers to that, right? He's trying to advance the family's social position. If powerful friends show up and find that there's a slave girl kind of sitting around, you know, ordering other slaves around, this is not going to advance their social position. It could potentially hurt it. But within the household itself, there may be jealousies or rivalries between slaves. It seems this family does have slaves, which again gives an indication of where they sit socioeconomically. But that's just not going to be a good visual, right? The other type of woman that he cautions him against is getting too close to prostitutes, but then he qualifies it and says specifically Ishtar women. Now, the key to understanding this is you have to know who Ishtar is. Ishtar was the Mesopotamian goddess of love and fertility. She was, in a way, like Aphrodite or Venus. And it seems to have been the case, so there is some debate about this, that those who patronize the Ishtar temple, the priestesses would themselves provide special favors, specifically sexual services. In a sense, they become, and the word for this is sacred prostitutes. This is true in a number of kind of ancient religions, particularly fertility cults, right? And so he's telling the son, be careful with these women because you need people who are going to support you and help you advance socially. An Ishtar priestess, even if she is potentially powerful, right? Her loyalty is going to be to the temple, to the goddess Ishtar. And as soon as somebody else comes along who has more money and more influence than you, you know, she's going to be gone, and she may use what she knows about you against you or against our family to help advance herself or somebody else, right? So anyway, that's a possible interpretation of this. Okay, Ishtar certainly was a fertility goddess, and that seems to be what's going on here. So I want you to pay attention to the process a little bit, right? We took some contextual information and we tried to extrapolate from there. Ancient Mesopotamia was kind of a dog-eat-dog world, and there was a lot of competition, right, in trade, in politics, in war, and things like this. And so, you know, this family is just trying to make its way. The judicial system was unfriendly, or it certainly favored those who were rich and powerful. And this family's trying to navigate all of those points of context here. I think I'm going to stop this video. I don't want it to drag on too long. I do want to look at the Code of Hammurabi and then at some Egyptian sources. And so I think I'll save that for another video.